Today's class was on the golden age of terrorism, which is a reference to the documentary section from the CNN series The 70s. One of the episodes addresses terrorism in the 1970s, and in this particular reading, which I think is a review for that particular episode, just looks at some of the acts of terrorism and makes some connections to present day issues. These weren't the acts of ISIS-inspired terrorists in recent times, but of terrorists in America during the 70s. So when you're looking at this particular reading, it's kind of what it's addressing. The documentary addressed, racial issues, Palestinian issues, PIRA. Looked at some of the strategies that were used, and you can see some connections to some of the acts of terrorism that are taking place present day. So again, as I mentioned in class, I'm really not too concerned with all of these specifics, acts of terrorism, what this group was fighting for, but just kind of in general, just to understand the 1970s climate. Um, we in the documentary it addressed the Weathered Underground, which was a terrorist organization that emerged after SDS, Students for a Democratic Society, split. Some of its hardcore members broke away. They wrote Prairie Fires, which is their manifesto. The documentary addressed one of the terrorist attacks that they were trying to bomb up Fort Dix, an officer club, Fort Dix, a military base in New Jersey. The bomb went off, killing the people who were making the bomb. The video also addressed these plane hijackings. They talked about the lack of security and some of the attacks that were committed on a global scale. Keep in mind, this is domestic, and the plane hijacking seemed to be international. In class, at some point, I did have you look at the skyjacker profile because we spent some time looking at why some of the skyjackers did what they did. I don't necessarily know if some of the people hijacking planes in the name of the Palestinian cause would fit the skyjacker profile. These individuals seem to believe that they're nationalists and they're fighting for the Palestinian cause, whereas like here, DB Cooper hijacking a plane for money really doesn't fit that particular profile. So the video did address like Layla Khalid, one of the members of the PFLP, hijacking a particular plane. The image at the bottom is of the Dawson Field hijacking. And keep in mind, in the documentary, they mentioned how the people on board the plane were released, which seems to be one of the differences for early 70s terrorism, where the hijackers seem to not be concerned with body count as or the Weathered Underground, simply more concerned about the political fear. The documentary also addressed the Provisional Irish Republic Army, the PIRA, and that really is a result of, I guess, in their view, British imperialism and what's going to happen with Northern Ireland right here. So the people of, let's take this section here, they are concerned about the people of Northern Ireland and want them to break away from Great Britain so this section can kind of rule independently. This goes back to pre-World War One. And Bloody Friday, which they mention, a protest that takes place here where the British government shoots protesters, which leads to Bloody Friday, where the attack was, we're going to set off a series of bombs in Belfast in a span of 90 minutes. When we're looking at the PIRA, notice some of the images when you do a Google search. All I would say is they have some look of ISIS, or maybe ISIS looks like them, since PIRA is definitely before ISIS comes into a thing. Now, in the 1970s, I'm just throwing this in here, in the United States, while people are dying for this cause, people are dying for that cause, or being terrorized, in the United States, maybe you're watching the show Sanford and Son, which was a popular show in the 70s. Maybe you're watching the Brady Bunch. So while people are taking over, the Olympic team at Munich, maybe that's something you do. You're watching, listening to Disco Duck. I highly encourage somebody to look up the lyrics to Disco Duck and listen to that song. Somebody's being hijacked. Let's listen to Disco Duck. What's going on in the U.S. during the 1970s terrorism? That's kind of what I mentioned before. So this is an image of the Munich massacre. This is usually the historic photo that is used in the documentary to address that. Again, I'm not too concerned with, the specifics here. I am more concerned knowing what in the 1970s, there's just a wave of things that are happening. And maybe that is the start for what's going to eventually, come in, post 9/11. Dawson Field's hijacking. If you click the link here, it would take you to some footage of those planes. And here you have, again, the Bloody Friday bombers, targets. So these are there's a map of where the bombs were going off. And again, if I was, in Belfast, I would be terrified. Like, I wouldn't know what to do. I probably would just stay home, stay somewhere that I knew was secure. And that's the point of the PRA's attack here, just to create a sense of, lack of safety. And that seems to be the issue that was addressed there. The video also addressed the massacre that involved the high school, taking over the high school in the name of the Palestinian cause. And here you see high school students who become, victims, over the issue between Israel and the Palestinian cause. The video mentioned Yasser Arafat. Yasser Arafat is considered in the 70s, 80s, up until his death, as a leader, political leader of the Palestinians. And so while some of the people that support him might support violence, this guy, as a politician, is caught in the middle. There's a debate. Was Yasser Arafat and his organization a political organization? Were they a terrorist organization? I guess it's going to depend on who you ask. Where does the United States come in? Well, the United States has been trying to figure out some sort of peace. Here's an image from the Carter administration of the Camp David Accords. And keep in mind, the U.S. is in a tough spot. If the United States brokers a deal between the two sides, if somebody's on the short end of getting something from that agreement, maybe you blame the United States. And if the United States does nothing, then they're held accountable because they're not doing anything. So the U.S. is caught in a touchy middle ground situation here. When we look at the hijackers, if you remember, we did talk about the Muslim Brotherhood and where the 9/11 hijackers and Bin Laden, in the 70s. They're probably receiving some form of education that comes from the Muslim Brotherhood, primarily Saeed Qutb. Remember, Saeed Qutb wrote that piece, Milestones. So I would say from the 60s, when that piece is written, all the way up into the 70s, he is influencing some of the individuals that are probably in their 20s and in their 30s, or, and then those individuals, fast forward maybe 10, 15 years later, those individuals are in a position where they are now viewed as leaders. And here you see some of the 9/11 hijackers, and maybe they were exposed to Bin Laden and Zamar, these two individuals who fought in the Soviet-Afghan war, and they were influenced by, Abdullah Azzam, al-Zawahiri. This guy's the current leader of Al-Qaeda. And then, these individuals probably are influenced by this guy. So just bringing that up. And one of the things that they have in common is they seem to all want to do something for the Palestinian cause. That seems to be a starting point for them. This is the guy who wrote the piece, The Global Islamic Resistance. He is like the guy who comes up with the strategy for Al-Qaeda. And I just circled a couple of items here where he talks about forming your unit, preparing yourself, and you have a personal duty. And these are some of the things that this guy writes in the 90s. Keep in mind, the documentary is about the 70s. But the thing I'm trying to point out here is that this guy right here is probably receiving some education in the 1970s. And that 1970s, those strategies are going to be influential in what eventually is going to happen later on. We talked about in that piece here, two other individuals, Dr. Fatal and al-Zawahiri. And again, in the 1970s, these individuals are looking, how is that Palestinian issue going to get resolved? If it doesn't get resolved, what issues do we have? And while they're trying to strategize, maybe in the United States, we're watching Soul Train and we're dancing and watching Saturday Night Fever. And that's pretty much it. I just want you thinking about some of the attacks that occurred in the United States. Let's try not to focus on all of the, attacks. Let's try to focus on the three that I'm concerned with: Weathered Underground, the PIRA, and they mentioned Black September, but any group that's advocating for the Palestinian cause.